If you were a short-term rental property and you're not on Verbo yet, you're a little bit behind the ball. You can see that even with the free data that AirDNA gives, that the more established a market is, the more likely that a listing is going to be on both Airbnb and Verbo. Or if you're an international market, more like Airbnb and Booking.com. Going multi-channel is a super important part of your success in 2023. There are 5 common mistakes that you need to be looking out for as a host if you're going to have Verbo as your second, third, fourth channel. I've been hosting for 8 years and I've made many of these mistakes myself, so let me help you prevent the same mistakes that everyone else is making. Let's get into the video. Welcome back, YouTube world. So in about an hour, I'm going to be going to Costa Rica. Way cool, because I also do landscape and wildlife photography, among many other things, since I took a year off last year. I will also try to shoot you some cool video while I'm there. So let's like this one, and hopefully you can like some more exotic footage later. The very first mistake that you're probably already making, and this one's a funny mistake, is that you're just calling it VRBO. It's called Verbo. They want me to tell you that, so that's the first mistake. The rest of them are real. I should probably do this video sponsored by Verbo right now, but I'm not that kind of guy. Getting sponsors is too much work, and I'm just here to make some content. So let's get into number 2. Number 2, first, you are not using the Verbo features that are available to you. And I'm going to give you one prime example about how Verbo has different features than Airbnb has. If you have an Airbnb-centric approach to this business model, you're going to be leaving a lot on the table. This is the way it works. See, Verbo and Booking.com, they're not like Airbnb in a lot of different ways. For example, Booking.com is basically a hotel platform that started allowing Airbnbs. Verbo is an offspring of HomeAway, Expedia Group, stuff like that, but HomeAway, that conglomerate, was all houses. They're very much more geared towards houses. The origination story of each platform actually matters. With Verbo, because of this, they have a feature that allows you to change what price you charge per day. Like Monday could be a different price than Tuesday, which can be different than Wednesday, different than Thursday. Even if you are using automations to manage your prices, these base settings should be set appropriately, because let's say something happens and one of your software just aborts on you and you're now without a software. You want Verbo to run in its native settings the right way. The very first thing you should do once you create a Verbo listing is get back in there and make sure that all of your native settings are correct, just in case if you're running it with a channel manager or something like that and everything shuts down, Verbo will still be running your account. You need to make sure that that thing's going to run without a channel manager just fine. Next is people take a set it and forget it approach to Verbo. For example, the pricing. Let's talk about that again. It's a great example. What happens is you may be adjusting prices on Airbnb for last minute bookings. This is totally normal. Airbnb gives us a small tick calendar, makes it easy to do that. And even when we run Wheelhouse or Price Labs, I tell all of you guys, don't let that stop you from changing prices manually, because if you've got availability over the next 2 weeks and you're using Price Labs or Wheelhouse, that means that they failed to get you booked. In this last 2 weeks, you're going to have to be active on there. But a lot of hosts, they only really adjust stuff on Airbnb, right? They only make manual adjustments to those. And Verbo and Airbnb need to be running different pricing models anyway. They're different consumer types, they book at different lead times, so you can't be running the same strategy on Airbnb and Verbo anyway. Your last minute manual adjustments on Airbnb won't be the ones you make on Verbo, and you need to make sure that you are aware of the kind of consumers that you're getting on Verbo so you can start meeting the market in a different way. This may seem complex, but customer A is going to book a certain way. Customer B is going to book a certain way. And if customer A is your regular Airbnb customer and customer B is your last minute Airbnb customer, you're probably already figuring those out. Customer C might be your regular Verbo customer and customer D might be your last minute Verbo customer. You just need to learn 2 more scenarios here. That if you could do A and B, you could do C and D. But that leads to my 4th tip for you guys that most people mistake. They are not prioritizing Verbo bookings. Yeah, they're prioritizing Airbnb bookings. You know what's really cool about Verbo is guests book farther in advance and they pay better, usually. I'd even argue that they're nicer, but I can't say that for sure. See, Verbo's done a good job of staying out of the news though, right? There's no gunshots and sex trafficking nearly as much as on Airbnb. Way cool. So we could even argue that Verbo guests are nicer. I do have a link down below. If you've not joined Verbo yet, there's a link in the description. Join Verbo now if you're sick of gunshots and human trafficking. I don't know if Verbo wants me to say that. I don't know. I guess let me find out how they feel about that. I'm just saying that Verbo, the guests get in trouble less. All the strange commentary aside, they've done a good job staying out of the news, and that really does boil down to us as hosts. It's just the truth. But the prioritization of Verbo bookings. If guests book further in advance and pay better, you want those bookings now. Then you can take the remainder of your calendar and let Airbnb start to fill up in the middle or last minute. But I honestly think you should get paid the most money for your listings at all times. And maybe the reason why Verbo pays better is there's a different supply and demand curve. Like I said, the more established a market is, the more likely that somebody's going to be on Airbnb and Verbo. But that's still only 25 to 30% of listings max, even in the most established markets. markets from the data that I find. I tell my students, if you can find a city where that number is under 20%, that's a sign that the market is a little underdeveloped. There's not a lot of good hosts out there. Over 25%, I consider to be an established market. Under 20%, I consider to be an upcoming market as far as the whole multi-channel thing goes. But that does show that there's just a way different supply curve on Verbo, and if there's ever solid demand on Verbo, you get to take advantage of that. The next mistake a lot of hosts make, this is number 5, is that they go nuts on software. You don't need to go nuts on software to go multi-channel. I know it's intimidating. This concept of having 2 separate sites that can get your listing booked, and you need to conversate on both, and you need to make sure your calendar's connected and you don't have any mistakes. Yeah, sure, it's intimidating, but we've been using something called HostHub for the longest time. It's easy, and now we're switching over to HostFully just so that way Wheelhouse can talk to both Airbnb and Verbo, stuff like that. We've always been so anti-software in our company. We didn't use a single piece of software till we had over 100 listings. We use HostHub for calendar connection and task management because it's the cheapest per listing, per connection opportunity there is on the market. And we did not want a software that blew all these different components out of whack. See, what you need to understand is the more heavy duty the software, the more control they take. And the more control they take, the less that you get to do. And some of these heavy duty API connected softwares just undo all of the things that you would normally do, like your ability to run pricing on Airbnb's multi-calendar. If you connect to something that's too heavy duty, you no longer can do that. And as you guys know, my pricing strategy is super hands-on. We use rule sets, we do all sorts of stuff. We don't want to use something like Guesty, where Guesty blocks us off of being able to do normal stuff on the Airbnb platform. And that's one reason why you won't ever see me recommend Guesty, aside from the fact that it's just way too expensive. I think my 2 favorites right now are HostHub for all you basic people, and then HostFully if you want to start running like pricing automations and do a little more cool things. I like HostFully because it takes like a sales funnel approach to its UI, which helps remind you what we're here for. We're here to sell off some inventory. Links for both will also be in the description of this video. I think in hindsight, both my personal expertise and my students, what happens is people will join Verbo a little late in the game when they're already a little frazzled and busy and they stop doing things perfect. When you first started as a host, you probably did a lot right. You cared a lot about your guests, you did your own housekeeping, you never missed a beat. When you get more listings and you get busy, you start cutting more corners and you stop caring for the little details as much and you're less curious than you used to be. So a lot of people joining Verbo are way less curious when they get on that platform and they don't fully utilize all the features that are available. They don't know the nuances of Verbo. They aren't, huge fans or loyal to Verbo because a lot of people who started with Airbnb, they become all gung-ho about being a superhost, which is in a way a facade, right? Just to get you so excited about Airbnb. Verbo doesn't mess around like that. Verbo is a consistent platform. They're going to give you their business. They're not going to mess with you. They've not been involved in any of these fiascos, like we've said, but they also don't have some weird program to try to turn you into like a little short-term rental zombie in the name of their brand. You're going to love Verbo because there's no surprises. So if you want to succeed with Verbo, understand that people on Verbo book farther in advance. Way cool. They have some features that aren't expected, and they don't have some features that you might have come to expect. If you've been a one-channel person this whole time, you might expect them to have things like a multi-calendar and rule sets. But remember, every software has a different approach to what they think is the most valuable for their operators. Verbo comes from a world of houses, not from a world of like inner city apartments. There is a lot of advantage to that. Like I said, guests will pay more money on that platform. You're more diversified against the supply and demand curve. Way cool stuff. And if Airbnb ever bans you, you've got Verbo to lean on. They are way less sensitive about the little things. So yeah, I like Verbo a lot. And stop calling it VRBO, please. Thanks, management. I'll see you guys on the other side.